Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is The Road Warrior, aka Mad Max 2. Now, The Road Warrior was co-written and directed by George Miller, and this, of course, is a sequel to George Miller's 1979 film, Mad Max. Now, I have The Road Warrior on the same DVD as Beyond Thunderdome, which of course was the third film in the Mad Max series. Now, this film was released in Australia in 1981 under the title Mad Max 2. However, when it was released here in America in 1982, it was retitled The Road Warrior. Now, the reason for this is because when the first Mad Max movie was released here in America, it did not do very well in the States. Now, in Australia, the first Mad Max movie was a huge success, but here in the States, it really didn't do too well, and not a lot of people saw the first Mad Max movie, so when Warner Brothers, who was the company that put this movie out in the United States, when they released it, they retitled it The Road Warrior, and they did not sell it as a sequel to Mad Max. Now the film is most commonly known as Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Now, today The Road Warrior is held as being one of the best movie sequels of all time. Like, this is considered to be one of those sequels which really does surpass the original. Like, it's held right up there with sequels like The Bride of Frankenstein, The Godfather Part 2, Dawn of the Dead, Aliens, The Dark Knight, Terminator 2. Like, it's held as one of those sequels which many people consider to be better than the original. And I have to agree with that, actually. Now, I do like the first Mad Max movie a lot. I actually like The Road Warrior better. But at the same time, though, this is such a radically different film from the first Mad Max movie that it's almost not even fair to compare the two movies. Like, the two films, even though this is a sequel to Mad Max, this film is so radically different from the first film that, once again, you almost can't compare the two movies. Like, the first movie was really a dystopian movie, this is an outright post-apocalyptic movie. Like, the first film was really about the breakdown of society. In this film, society has officially collapsed. Now, George Miller actually based a lot of the style of this movie off a 1975 post-apocalyptic film called The Boy and His Dog. Now, even though the first Mad Max movie was not a very big hit in the United States, this movie was a huge hit, and this is the film which really pushed the Max Rockatansky character into pop culture. Like, this is the film which made the character of Mad Max into a pop culture icon. And this movie made such an impression on pop culture that I actually think a lot of people mistake this movie for being the first Mad Max movie, because whenever people think Mad Max, they think this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and people forget that the first Mad Max movie really was not a post-apocalyptic movie. The sequel was, so I think a lot of people, they mistake this for being the first one. And this movie has spawned God knows how many different rip-offs and knockoffs and cash-ins, and this movie also kind of set the standard for a lot of post-apocalyptic movies that have come after this. And this movie, in a strange way, also kind of influenced a lot of the Friday the 13th sequels, or at least I heard that, because in the movie, the main villain, Lord Humungus, wears this almost like hockey mask kind of mask, and apparently Jason's look in the third Friday the 13th movie, which is the Friday the 13th movie where Jason got the hockey mask, apparently that was actually inspired by Lord Humungus in this movie. And I remember when I was a little kid, my dad was watching this on TV, and I saw Lord Humungus, and I was like, is that Jason? Because at that age, even at that age, I knew about the Friday the 13th movies, and I was like, why is Jason in a post-apocalyptic wasteland? Obviously, it's not Jason, but I have heard that the look for Jason in most of the Friday the 13th movies to come after Part 3 was kind of inspired by the villain of this movie. Now, once again, I've only heard that. I'm not sure how much truth there is to that, but at the same time, though, just compare the two. Now, the plot of The Road Warrior is it's set sometime after the events of the first movie. Now, in the first movie, you saw the beginning of the breakdown of society. Like, in the first movie, you realized that something was going on which was causing society to break down. In this movie, you get a better understanding of what that was. In this movie, you find out that the world is actually running out of oil, and basically because of this, society is collapsing, and basically society has fallen into a global war. And in this movie, it's implied that between this and the first movie, there may have actually been a nuclear war. So, the movie follows the character of Max Rockatansky from the first movie. Now, in the first movie, the character of Max was a cop, but in this film, it does not appear that law enforcement exists anymore. But in the movie, Max is out in the desert, and he comes across this community of people who are protecting this oil rig from a band of bandits led by this man who calls himself Lord Humungus, who is now trying to get the oil. And these people are basically having a war over this oil, and Max just wants to get some gasoline and be on his way, but he kind of gets roped into helping these people. But that's the basic plot line of The Road Warrior. But The Road Warrior is an excellent movie. It's a great post-apocalyptic movie, it's a great action movie, and it's a really good sequel as well. And it's one of those sequels which actually succeeds at being better than its predecessor. And the movie also has kind of a Western feel to it. Like, it almost feels like a Western movie that just happens to be set in a post-apocalyptic future. And I believe that was what George Miller was going for. Now, in the movie, Mel Gibson, of course, reprises his role as the character of Max, and he does a really good job in this movie. And one of the things I thought was interesting about Max in this movie is he is the hero of the movie, but he's almost like a reluctant hero because, once again, he kind of gets roped into helping these people because really he just wants to be on his way, and in a lot of ways Max in this movie is almost like an outsider. Like, he's not really a part of the main drama that's going on in the story, but he kind of gets roped into all of it. Another thing that's really interesting about this movie is it begins and it closes with a narration, which you find out at the end of the movie. This narration is being done by an older version of the feral kid, who is another character from the movie, who I'll talk about that character in a little bit. But the way Max is talked about in both the beginning and the closing of the movie, he's talked about almost as if he's a legend. And then you have the feral kid, who is a really interesting character who you find out at the end of the movie, when he grows up, he becomes like the leader of this group of people, but he is an interesting character, the feral kid, and definitely a very memorable character from the movie. And in the film, Max and the feral kid have a strange kind of relationship with each other. Like, you could tell the feral kid kid really does look up to Max, and also I kind of got this idea that because in the first movie Max had a son who was killed by the Toe Cutter gang, and in a weird way, and this isn't really addressed in the movie, but I almost got the feeling that maybe Max sees something of his own son in the feral kid. Another interesting character in this movie is the Gyro Captain, who's a really funny character. In the beginning, you're not really sure if he's gonna end up being on Max's side or not, because in the beginning, without giving too much away for those of you who haven't seen this movie, the movie begins where they really don't like or trust each other, but I actually ended up really liking the Gyro Captain, and in a lot of ways he's kind of like Max, because he ends up becoming like a part of this community of people, and him, like Max, kind of gets roped into helping these people, and there's even a point in this movie where he does try to escape with this girl that he takes a liking to, but he ends up helping these people, so in a way he is almost like Max in a way. He's like Max in the sense that both him and Max in this movie are kind of like reluctant heroes. And in the movie, of course, you have the villain, Lord Humungus, who is a very memorable villain, and is a great villain, too. Like, I would say him, and then the character of Immortan Joe from the fourth Mad Max movie, to me, those are the two best villains in the Mad Max franchise. But once again, Lord Humungus is a really good villain, and I actually heard that originally the character of Lord Humungus, he was originally going to be the character of Jim Goose from the first movie. Now, in the first movie, Max had a partner named Jim Goose, who was also his best friend, who you thought ended up getting killed by Toe Cutter's gang in the first movie, but apparently in the original script for this movie, Lord Humungus was actually going to be Jim Goose, who apparently just went crazy between the events of the first movie and this movie, and that would have been really interesting, but of course that would have also changed the entire character dynamic between Max and Lord Humungus in this movie, and I'm almost glad that they didn't do that, but at the same time, though, that would have been really interesting. But once again, The Road Warrior, aka Mad Max 2, is an awesome movie, and if you haven't seen this movie already, I highly recommend you check this movie out, and my next movie review will be the third film in the series, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.